First and foremost, I would have a standard application that the employee fills out. Probably keep it the same for everybody. Make sure you guys have the required forms for state taxes and such like that, the I-9 documents. So basically a put together new hire packet that is standard across the board is the first and foremost. I would also include if you guys had special policies or procedures that you follow as a company that you want signed off on, I would get that stuff signed off on right away. And then I would also, it's also best practice to get all the required trainings per the state that they're in and the law requirements set up for that first week. So kind of onboard the employee, get all your necessary documentation, all your paperwork filled out, answer any questions, and then kind of schedule those required meetings for those first couple of days. So as far as managing payroll, you want to make sure that, I think the biggest thing when you're working remote is when you don't have the hustle and bustle of the office, you could kind of get lost in not sticking to your task. So if you kind of task out your team with different duties, ensure that they're clocking in and clocking out on those required break times for your hourly people, that can kind of help keep the payroll, streamlined and make sure there's not any instances of them not being available or being gone for long periods of time. Depending on what type of environment you're in, sometimes they have you can't be your mouse can't move, or you can't be stagnant for too long, because then there's tells that will tell that. So a lot of times, depending on if you're having issues with employees not being available, you can kind of set weekly meetings and weekly goals. As far as payroll, I think for remote employees, it's better to be done on a daily basis. Have those managers checking their in punches, their lunch punches, and their out punches. That way, if there's any question of their availability or things that they're missing or not clocking in, you hit it the next day. So kind of stop that in its place. If you have an employee that's working remote, and you're finding it hard to track them down, or maybe they have a lot of missed punches, it's easier to kind of navigate those things at the beginning and kind of nip it before it becomes a long outstanding issue, because harder to manage employees. It's much harder to manage employees because you don't know what they're doing. If you set weekly meetings and goals for them to hit and they're not hitting those goals, that may tell you that they need help on managing time. A lot of it for me is missed punches and missed lunches. There should be no reason why you're missing your punch or your lunch if you're at home. And that's pretty much how I manage my team. Just set weekly meetings and weekly goals. And if our employee's not being available, just nip it as soon as possible. So a lot of people may look at the rate of pay as compensation for a job, and they might bypass a job that the compensation isn't as high as they wanted. But you also want to look at the bigger package. So do they have medical benefits? Do they match the employee's contribution for 401k? Do they offer any type of life insurance or supplementary insurance? Those things are beneficial. The older you get, it's kind of hard to get the younger folks to look at that, because they really just want more money in their pocket, which we all understand. But as you get older and you need to go to the doctor and you need a retirement plan, it's very beneficial to have those things. So even if you start with a basic minimum essential coverage plan for employees, and you may match 50% of it, that could be enticing for the employees to join that. And it also helps you as an employer, gives you a little bit of a tax break there. 401k is the same. It's a good opportunity for those employees to invest in their futures. And you can also help those employees know that, we would like you to stay. We're investing in your future too by offering a match. So even though those things might be costly on the front side, I think for long-time employee retention and shorter turnover, it's a great benefit to offer medical, dental, vision, 401k, and supplementary plans to employees. It's really going to depend on the state, first and foremost. If your state is a daily hourly rate, then you want to consider the shifts that you're putting those employees on. It's kind of easy to stay away. It's easier to stay away from overtime with office staff, because you kind of have a standard, 8 to 5. But when you have those restaurant employees that may want to work a few shifts here and a few shifts there, you want to make sure that they're not going over that 8-hour time period in a day. And for weekly rates. So some states offer weekly overtime, which is easier to work with, but in California specifically, it's a daily rate. So I think if you're trying not to pay out overtime, you want to make sure you keep those shifts under 6 hours. And then at the end of maybe halfway through the week, Wednesday, Thursday, depending on when your work week starts, you want to, for a standard, Monday to Sunday schedule, you kind of want to look at those hours on a Wednesday. If you don't want to have overtime, you want to see employees that are close to that threshold and maybe not schedule them for the next day or two. And then another thing you want to look at is a lot of people don't know that overtime is also going to depend on the schedule of the week. So not only if they work 6 hours in a day or 40 hours or over 8 hours in a day or 40 hours in a week, if they work 7 consecutive days, that all of that time on that 7th day is considered overtime because there's no break for them. So not only making sure you're looking at the daily rates and the state laws, the weekly rates, but also how that schedule is going to affect those overtime employees, because you could schedule them Monday through Friday and think, oh, the week's over. But if your pay cycle is Monday to Sunday, you still have to consider any hours they work on those next 2 days could be potentially all overtime and double time. So a lot of it, again, I'm going to say state specific, and you want to be really careful with using PTO as verbiage, because paid time off engulfs sick and vacation time. In states like California, where PTO or vacation is considered earned wages, if you say, hey, I'm going to give this employee 80 hours of PTO with the thought that 40 hours is sick, but you don't list that on the stub, when they're terminated, you have to pay out that PTO. So verbiage in payroll PTO plans is very important. It's always best practice to have a separate sick plan and a separate vacation plan. With the laws changing quite frequently on sick time, and the allotments are going up as we move, further and further in with different sick time. So like this year, California has gone up to 40 hours. I find it best practice to front load 40 hours because you can track every employee on the same schedule, fiscal year in 1/1 to 12/31. You can usually put in a usage waiting time. So in California, that's 90 days. So a lot of employers get concerned, like, I don't want to offer it right away. I don't want them to be able to use it right away. But at the same time, if you have an employee that's been with you for 90 days, has been coming to work and showing up, they should be eligible for that sick time at 90 days. When you accrue sick time specifically, you usually have to allow them to over accrue, because when it comes to the first of the year, they need to have time available if they didn't use it prior year end. Vacation, I've found, is better on a per pay period accrual basis. Figure out an allotment that you want to give employees. I see it a lot done based on tiers of employment. So if you've been with the company less than a year, you may not be entitled to that vacation. But as soon as you hit 12 months, you are entitled to start using it. Some companies will allow you to accrue from time of hire but not use it. And some won't even allow you to accrue until you can use it, because again, it's earned vacation in some states and you have to pay it out upon termination. Determining how much vacation you want to offer an employee and dividing it by the pay cycle is really the best practice. So for example, I'm an employer and I want to offer an employee 40 hours a year, and they get paid every 2 weeks. So you would take their biweekly cycle, you'd take the allotment of 40 hours, divide it by 26, and get a flat amount of 1.54 every 2 weeks to give them to equal that 40. So if you can determine the allotment and make it a specific amount across the board based on tiers of employment, that's usually the cleanest and safest way to go for vacation.